Hello, I'm Mary Ito, and welcome to the CRAM podcast. CRAM is an acronym for Communicating Research and More, which is what we try and do on this podcast. A lot of exciting research and groundbreaking ideas never reach the public, but they have the potential to change the way we think and act. When one of the godfathers of artificial intelligence, Geoffrey Hinton, a Canadian, by the way, warns us of the possible end of people, well, that worries me a lot. Hinton's landmark research on neural networks and deep learning paved the way for what we are witnessing now, generative models like ChatGPT that encompass more knowledge than we've ever seen. And it's not only mind-boggling for people like me, it's even surprised their creators. But there are other experts who disagree, and they say that fears of an AI takeover are overblown. I want to check in with someone who's not only been following what's been happening, but who's been predicting similar AI scenarios for a long time. Acclaimed sci-fi writer Robert Sawyer. Rob has released 24 novels. He's won the top 3 awards in science fiction, the Nebula, the Hugo, and the John W. Campbell Memorial Award. And we are waiting for his next novel, The Downloaded, to come out soon. Hi, Rob. Thanks for joining us again.
Hi, Mary. I'm delighted to be back. Thanks for asking me back.
Well, it was funny because I was thinking about you being a sci-fi writer, and I thought, okay, can it get any better than this? First the pandemic, and now ChatGPT.
Well, it is good and it is bad. Because the problem with being a science fiction writer is we're treated like Cassandra. We are making predictions all the time and nobody ever pays any attention to them until it is too late. Absolutely, science fiction was filled with stories about plagues that might devastate the planet. And yet fundamental basic precautions were not being taken to prevent that from happening. And even more famously, science fiction has been really the only voice of caution about artificial intelligence for decades now, from before there even was that term coined by Marvin Minsky, artificial intelligence. Before that term existed, we were talking about the dangers. And yet now people are, if I had any hair, I'd be doing what they're doing, pulling it out. As if suddenly all of this has magically appeared out of nowhere, when in fact there has been a literature devoted to the pros and the very considerable cons of artificial intelligence in pop culture for almost a century now.
I've actually heard some people, and knowledgeable people, saying that this could be a turning point in human existence. What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yuval Harari, for instance, is one of the people who has said that, the author of Sapiens, of course. And yes, it could very well be. And this is one of these things like Pascal's wager about whether or not you should believe in God, right? Pascal said, I don't see any evidence for God, but it's easier to be a believer and be wrong about that than to be a non-believer and be wrong about that when you face a superior being, right? If you get hauled up in front of God and say, oh, I never believed in you. Sorry, I would have lived my life differently had I done so. That's a lot of trouble. Whereas if you believe in God and he never emerges, or you never face God face to face, what have you lost? You've lost some Sunday mornings and some money put in the collection plate, but you've lived a more moral and ethical life. So Pascal's wager says it's better off to believe in this superior entity than to not. And this is very much a parallel with artificial intelligence. If we're about to be at a point where we no longer are the superior beings on this planet, but something that we have created, artificial intelligences supersede us as the most powerful entities. It behooves us right now to believe in that possibility and prepare for it rather than to discount it. And then once it's too late, say, oh, we should have put safeguards in place around AI. So it's very much a similar parallel. We're going to either yes or no face a superior supernatural being when we die. And yes or no, we're going to face a superior electronic being in the next few years. And it's better to bet in both cases, Pascal would argue, and Yuri Havali would argue, that it is a reality coming down the pike.
So you say in the next few years, then where do you think we are right now as far as where we stand with AI?
Well, remember, the most famous pop culture version of marauding computers, 2001: A Space Odyssey. The math is easy. That was 22 years ago. So we are, when I say the next few years, we in science fiction and in the artificial intelligence community have been saying this is imminent for a very long time now. And yes, absolutely, we are either right at the threshold or nowhere near. And this is the fundamental dichotomy right now. We either, with ChatGPT and Bard and all of these other emerging chatbots, they either are just shy of being super intelligent, smarter than us, and having an agenda, or they were nowhere near. They're just dumb stunts. They're things that have no intelligence, no mind of their own, don't have any thoughts, and we don't know for sure. And we won't know for sure which of those two realities it is until one of them becomes either obsolete as a notion. Oh, this stuff had never have intelligence, because no matter how much it mimics human speech, it doesn't mimic thought in any way, shape, or form. Or it's going to be right on our doorstep. Either way, it's this decade for sure. It's this decade and maybe the next 18 months.
Okay, but where do you fall then in that equation? Because my sense is that people like Geoffrey Hinton, they are falling on the side of, okay, this is ominous. This could happen. This could be a takeover. I mean, maybe I'm over dramatizing it, but that's the sense I got.
That's exactly what Hinton said, and exactly what Harari said in The Economist, and many other. And Stephen Hawking said this before he died years ago. This is not a new concern. What's new now is that it's getting the front page attention it probably deserved a year ago, a decade ago, 25 years ago, 50 years ago. Where do I stand on it? We've had conversations philosophically and theologically before, Mary. I'm an atheist. Despite what Pascal said, I have failed to buy into this notion that there is a supreme being, which means I've paid the risky side of the wager. That is, if I get called up by a god in front of a god, and that god cares one way or another, whether anybody believes in him, her, they, it, then I could be in a lot of trouble. Right?
You're done for.
I'm done for. And in terms of AI, I am absolutely convinced that AI can flawlessly mimic human interaction. There's no way. In fact, one of the things that people are calling for is there should be legislation that says an AI has to declare itself to be an artificial intelligence whenever dealing with a human being, because already we're at the flawless point where a chatbot, certainly by text, and even with really good voice synthesis these days by voice, you can't tell. There's no way to tell. It's not these mechanical computer sounding voices that you see in science fiction. It's flawless with prosody and inflection and all the things that make human speech natural.
Right.
I changed all of that. An AI can mimic, right? Everything, the pauses, so that impersonation of a human being is already flawless. Whether there is any intentionality behind that, whether there's a thinking being behind it, that's a really interesting philosophical question, and I have not made up my mind about it. But on that one, I err in favor of, it might indeed be emergent consciousness with an agenda and morality separate, different from ours. They call that in artificial intelligence research the alignment problem, by which they mean the aligning the values of AI in terms of morality and desires with human values and desires. Because there's no reason to think that they would naturally come up with the same basic tenets that we consider to be, human values, given how incredibly malleable human values are, right?
Okay, I want to look at two scenarios. And one is that AI actually does develop some kind of consciousness. It becomes a sentient thing. Okay, let's leave that right now. Let's just say it doesn't, though. Shouldn't we still be scared?
Yes,
because
we should. Yeah.
Okay, but can I just? Yeah. Well, yeah. Let me ask you, because I'm listening to what you're saying, and you were saying we're already at the point where it is doing such a fantastic job mimicking us, right? So if it's so good at mimicking us, does it necessarily need consciousness to do great harm and to actually, come to some kind of conclusion? I don't even know what the proper word would be, but based on all the data that it has harnessed to say, you know what, these people are no good. The obvious thing is we need to get rid of these people.
Right. There's no question that anybody who looks at our planet from anything but a human-centric point of view would say we've been detrimental for it. You ask any chimpanzee, you ask any trout in the stream, you ask any tree in the forest, you ask any bird in the sky, hey, have the world been made better or worse in the 200,000 years that there's been Homo sapiens, and particularly in the 200 years since the Industrial Revolution? The answer is worse in every conceivable way. To the point where now what we have done to the environment is an existential threat, not just for us, but for the entire biome, for every living thing on the planet. So absolutely. I mean, it doesn't take, an AI can easily come to the same conclusion that Greta Thunberg came to, in the last 5 years, or that Al Gore came to, 25 years ago, which is that human beings are the biggest threat to the survival, not just of humanity, but of all life on Earth.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, I mean, even if they necessarily can't act on their own volition, other people might make them act, right? Might make them. So we're still we're in danger no matter what.
Oh, absolutely. Because if I were to say, let's go back to the example we've had previously. I've had theological arguments. If I were to say to you, here's all the reasons I don't believe in God, and you come back at me and say, here are all the reasons why I'm a spiritual person, we can argue back and forth, but neither of us, we're just Homo sapiens. We're both bright, intelligent, well-read Homo sapiens, but that's all we are. I've never managed to convince you. You've never managed to convince me. You get something that's brighter and better read than any human being who wants to argue, and somebody either it of its own volition or somebody who has an agenda says, okay, find the perfect argument, the absolutely perfect argument for Mary Ito, particularly based on everything you can find out online, every interview she's ever conducted, every social media post she's ever made, all of the records of what magazines and newspapers she subscribes to that can be found, they're all online, all of that, her banking and all of that, everything I need to know, and then craft the perfect argument aimed right at Mary Ito that will convince her that atheism is the one true worldview, and then turn around and do that same targeted thing for somebody else. Now, atheism versus deism or theism still is basically a philosophical issue. Turn it around to whether or not, so we just had a huge public service strike in Canada, whether or not public service employees should be allowed to work from home, even though they're on the taxpayers' payroll, right? They could instruct AIs to go after everybody who is skeptical of that individually and target them with the perfect argument that would flip their opinion 180 degrees. Mm-hmm. All of their opponents would become their advocates. So absolutely, this mastery of language coupled with the access to everything that has ever been written or said by specific human beings and the generality, the corpus of everything that Homo sapiens has ever produced makes it for an unbeatable opponent.
Yeah. And this is why, I read that article by Harari as well in The Economist.
Mm-hmm.
And, and he even talked about the whole idea of new stories coming out of AI, right? And stories, as we know, can be extremely dangerous because they come under the guise of propaganda. They could come under a new kind of religion. I mean, how do you feel about that? I find that so frightening.
The novel I'm working on now, the one that comes after the download, is called Domestic Us, and it's about artificial intelligence using the power of narrative as a way to domesticate human beings. So I'm totally on board with what Harari is saying, because the same idea is one that I'm playing with. This notion that narrative, whether it is the Bible or whether it is Mein Kampf, whether it is, whatever, if it is written persuasively enough, it manages to suck in human beings. We are absolutely suckers for story, for narrative. As I've said, I think on this show before, Carl Linnaeus, who gave us our name, Homo sapiens, was flattering us, people of wisdom. A much better name, and it's not original to me, is Homo narrans, people who tell stories, or just as provocatively, people who listen to stories and are influenced by stories. And I was just this past week at the Writers of the Future conference in Los Angeles, and I gave a talk there about the fact that, say you want a Rob Sawyer novel, but written from a theist instead of an atheist perspective, go to ChatGPT. You can have bespoke fiction of any author or a mix of authors. Robert J. Sawyer's kind of philosophy with Mark Twain's kind of folksy storytelling. And oh my God, we could call that Max Schupp Tom Sawyer. No, it just came to me, right? Because right, him and me, Tom Sawyer. Right? But you can get that. You can get bespoke, custom-made story right now. Now, you would probably ask for it, you or me, say, oh, my favorite author was, and you name your favorite author. Let's say your favorite author is Emily Bronte. But of course, she hasn't written in quite some time, with the sort of permanent writer's block that goes with being deceased. Doesn't stop you from asking for a whole new series of Emily Bronte novels. You want one a day, if you're like a voracious reader, the way Harlequin romance readers are. One a day, Emily Bronte novels for the rest of time. That's insane in a way, but it's also benign. Now, what happens?
I don't know if it's so benign, Rob.
Well, it's benign in the sense that those novels have no particular agenda except maybe a Victorian approach to morality, which Bronte had.
Yeah. So, well, I want to ask you before we keep moving on. Rather than even going further with possible scenarios with AI advancing, given what we know now with how AI is operating at this moment in time, what do you see as the downfall? Because already I'm saying
what I said is the bespoke stuff that's entertainment is benign, but the stuff that political strategists are going to create, the United States is in a perpetual election cycle, it seems, from the day, Joe Biden was inaugurated in office to the day in which the voting will occur in November of next year. It's entirely an election cycle for that country. And it is every election cycle. And in Canada, we do smaller elections, but still, but we have a government that could fall at any time because of a non-confidence motion, right? Political leaders today, the speeches are crafted by teams. They're tested against audiences for the responses that they're going to get. An AI can generate the perfect speech to either wherever you fell on the truck convoy in Ottawa, right? To convince you absolutely that it was an important bastion of freedom that we were able to do this, or to convince you absolutely that it was utter hooliganism that had nothing to do with any stated principles, but was just a chance to, shut down the capital city by a bunch of yahoos. Either one of those things can be brilliantly crafted now by AI, those narratives, and they can be fed to you every morning on Facebook or social media, you'll keep seeing over and over again, and it becomes an echo chamber, and you hear the message that whoever's in charge wants you to hear. These AI tools are incredibly powerful propaganda generators.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, initially when this started to catch on, I was hearing a lot from educators, right? Because people were using it to write essays and to do all kinds of things. And then I was just reading, that education companies are bearing the brunt of this. And that some of the large ones, including, there's Pearson, which is a huge publisher.
Pearson, largest publisher of textbooks. Yeah.
Oh, well, I heard that the value of their company recently went, Yeah. And then other education companies as well. So, I mean, again, given what we know about AI right now, I mean, how do you see jobs? You know, what jobs do you think are going to be disappearing very soon because of this?
Well, it's not just educational writing. I was talking just before Christmas to my friend Spider Robinson, other very fine Canadian science fiction writers. But he was saying to me, you know, Rob, we got in at the right time. We made out like bandits, and we're getting out at the right time, because the job of any kind of professional storyteller, whether it's journalist, whether it's somebody who's writing theses, you know, university dissertations, whether it's people writing sermons, whatever it is, all of those jobs that simply require putting words in a provocative and persuasive sequence on page or screen are going to be absolutely taken over by AI. I was talking to a friend of mine who is a lawyer, and he said, you know, I hadn't been paying much attention to this until I realized that more than 90% of what I charge clients $500 an hour for can be done right now, today, for free by AI systems. And so even, you know, the people who thought that their white-collar jobs were secure are actually in very significant danger. Now, for those who are watching the video version of this, you may notice I'm wearing a blue collar today, because it might in fact be that those are the jobs, the ones that require manual dexterity, are actually more AI proof at the moment, because AI is really sophisticated right now. Robotics is still, it's getting there. There are robots that can dance. There are robots that can downhill ski. There are robots that can do all kinds of things, but they're hugely expensive devices, each individual unit costing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. Whereas a single chat engine like ChatGPT deployed for free to the public has no cost to the user, or negligible cost to the user. So the jobs that are going to disappear are anything that requires the bringing in of all kinds of material, synthesizing it into a digestible form, and outputting it. And whether that's a secretary typing a letter for the boss, or whether it's me writing a provocative science fiction trilogy about the future of humans and AI, like my Wake, Watch, and Wonder trilogy, both of us are very likely out of a job this decade.
But ChatGPT, I mean, AI, it can also write code. It can do math,
absolutely.
right? It can do math. It can do chemistry. It can do, what about all those jobs that are related?
Those are all white collar job. Boom, gone yesterday, right? It's absolutely anything that is, you know, the G in ChatGPT stands for generative. Anything that is about generating content, whether that content is computer code, musical notes, which are a kind of code, coherent sentences, which are a kind of code. Any of that is easily automated. Now, it's not perfect today, early in 2023. It will be perfect in 18 months, 36 months, 72 months at the outside. So if I was entering university today, A, I don't know if I would enter university today, and B, I don't know what I would tell if I had, let's say, an 18-year-old son or daughter right now, what I would advise them if they said to me, hey, Dad, what job, you know, what should I study at university to ensure a job? Because by the time they finish 48 months from now, 4 years from now, for a bachelor's degree, we will have passed from the point of nascent chat technology to fully mature chat technology, where anything that you might have trained to produce while you were in university will be producible for free by this technology.
Yeah. So as horrific as the situation seems right now, with the repercussions of what we have already, I just want to explore the other scenario of the possibility of AI developing consciousness.
Yes, that's the really scary one.
Yes. You believe it's possible, right?
I do. And I believe it very simple reason. We developed consciousness, and we developed it when our ancestors didn't have it. I don't know at what point you draw that line, whether it was Homo erectus or whether it was the first, paramecium that learned to detect food is on the left instead of on the right. But somewhere along the line, matter on this planet went from being not conscious to being conscious. And we're the instantiation of the highest level of consciousness that we've identified on this planet to date. So clearly, in my worldview, there's nothing mystical about it. It's not that God endowed us with consciousness. It's something that emerges spontaneously from sufficient complexity. And we're definitely primed for that in the silicon substrate.
Okay, so I don't want to get too technical, and not that I can, because I just don't know. I don't know all about neural networks, etc.
Ask ChatGPT to give me a Mary Ito who has a PhD in electrical engineering and computer science, right? And then boom,
exactly, and have her do the interview. But anyway, so from what I was trying to understand this, and ChatGPT and these similar chatbots, they're all LLMs, right? They're large language models. Okay.
Yes.
So what I read is that the larger they are, the more they're capable of doing.
Right.
Much to the surprise even of their creators.
Yes.
I was reading that they had these kind of emergent abilities that came out as, they increased the size of these LLMs, and even their creators were surprised by what they could do, which scares me. Because that you don't know that what you created is going to do that. So do you see at some point you create these larger and larger LLMs, and there's this kind of turning point or sweet spot where something happens?
Absolutely. And again, Cassandra.
Yeah.
1979, Star Trek, the motion picture. They have this being called V'ger, which started as a dumb space probe and ended up being an intelligent being. And the line to explain it is, it gained so much knowledge. It gained so much knowledge, it attained consciousness itself. Right? That's 44 years ago that we were warning about this in that specific sentence. It gained so much knowledge, it attained consciousness itself. We've been saying science fiction, and there are examples in print science fiction that way precede that sufficiently large corpuses of information will spontaneously, that is, as an emergent property, give rise to consciousness. And absolutely, guess what they're finding? You feed the entire corpus of human knowledge via every book that Google ever scanned, including all the in-copyright ones that they scanned and made available in a database, every email message ever sent. That's when they talk about the large language model. That's what they're working with. And out of all that information, when you can synthesize it all, we in science fiction have been saying, not definitely, but conceivably, and therefore worth worrying about, is the possibility that consciousness will emerge out of that. And now to hear people who should have known better, who saw 2001: A Space Odyssey, who grew up watching Star Trek, who've seen the Terminator movies, who maybe, if I'm lucky, have read my own science fiction or William Gibson's science fiction, to say, oh, well, nobody told us it was going to turn out that way. It's incredibly frustrating. And also, to a significant degree, I think, disingenuous on their part. They knew full well, like Prometheus, that they were playing with fire. And then they're saying, oh, I didn't expect my fingers to get burned. Well, like the people who play with fire, in the forests of California and set whole state on fire, right? Because of stupid, fires or gender reveal parties with fireworks. I never expected the whole thing to go up in flames. Well, come on. You had plenty of warning that is exactly what would happen. And the arrogance, Homo sapiens, come back to that term. We should be Homo arrogans, because the arrogance of individual people always thinking, oh, yeah, but I'm careful. I'm bright. None of that is going to happen to me. That's why we have people like Hinton renouncing the work that they have done. And so, he said very interestingly, I still kind of like that title, the Godfather of AI.
Yeah, he did say that.
Right? Which is like, the God, the real God, if he exists of Christianity, says, yeah, I'm the proud father of Jesus, right? Never says, I'm the proud father of the Prince of Darkness, right? But, Hinton is saying, yeah, that Satan, that was one of mine.
Okay, let me just stop you. So how do you necessarily know that it's knowledge and the accumulation of knowledge that will bring forth consciousness? Because I'm assuming, whenever it was that we developed consciousness, we didn't have a lot of knowledge.
Right. Okay. So there are two answers to that. One comes from early childhood education. Most people can't remember anything before they're about 2 years old or anything significant. Why is that? One very good explanation, nobody knows for sure, but one very good explanation is that you start to have a degree of language that allows you to anchor memories, right? If I ask you to remember your first car, that's easy to remember because you were 16 or older when you got your first car, right? And you had a fully sophisticated vocabulary. I ask you to remember your first pacifier, and you can't because you didn't even know what it was called when you got the first pacifier, right? And so that's part of it right there. The other thing that's very significant in terms of language is Orwellian, right? George Orwell was all about how if you make it impossible to think a concept, you constrain it, right? So, newspeak, war is peace, right? Then you can't talk about either war or peace if you make them into one concept, right? So the language is absolutely significant that we and AI are now both at the point where children were at 2 years old. AI is now at way beyond postgraduate level in its language ability. And so should be able to do anything that a 2-year-old can do in terms of that. Now, in terms of when consciousness emerged in our civilization, as you say, we didn't have books and comic books and TV shows and all that stuff. What we did have, and this is most anthropologists would agree, is increasingly large numbers of people living together. So prior to the emergence of language, most primates, and we see it now with our closest relatives, chimpanzees and bonobos, closest living relatives, lived in groups of a small family group of a half dozen, 20, 30, 40 individuals. As we got better and better at hunting and gathering, we were able to support bigger and bigger communities. And that complexity is where our consciousness really started to emerge, where I had to remember, okay, I got to keep track of 100 different people. Who has done a favor for me in the past? Who do I owe a favor to? Who is going to have my back when the others, a little coalition of others, wanted to oppose me? Who can I not trust, right? Watch out for Jan Kaska, who has a lean and hungry look, right? Or Jan Cassius. All of that, is multiple threading of thoughts and complexity. And that probably the social network, literal social network, not Facebook, the literal social network, reaching a level of cognitive complexity. And that's where our consciousness, in terms of being self-reflective and having opinions, not just about whether it's a nice day for a hunt or not, but whether Mary can be trusted, whether Rob is a good guy. Will Rob remember that I loaned him $10, or can I safely forget to pay him back because he will have forgotten that he loaned me that? All of that infrastructure of society gave rise to supervening on top of it, our consciousness.
So you don't think that consciousness is necessarily connected to a living cell?
I don't think there's any reason to believe that. I mean, it may turn out that in fact it is solely something that can be done biologically, because we don't know how our consciousness operates in our brains. I think the theories I've given you are really solid about why consciousness emerged, but how it operates in our brains, nobody has been able to, they call it in consciousness studies, the search for the neural correlates of consciousness, the thing that involves your neurons that actually correlates, that actually is consciousness. Nobody's ever found it. No matter how many EEG studies, and there are people, also think, well, maybe it's quantum mechanical in the brain, but it's all theoretical. Nobody has ever been able to say, okay, if I carve out this little part of your brain, your consciousness disappears. So therefore it must have been in that little part. Descartes, right back in the day, René Descartes thought he had found the part, but he didn't have the brain surgery techniques to determine whether he was right or not. He thought the pineal gland, which is kind of in the middle of the brain and is not paired, that's where consciousness is, right? You got a left lobe, a right lobe, this and that are symmetrical. And then there's this thing in the middle. And he said, well, that's it. That must be where the consciousness is. That was his postulate. But when we find out if people have their pineal glands removed because of cancer or whatever, guess what? They're still conscious. He couldn't test that postulate. Every postulate anybody's ever come up with that we can test. Oh, maybe it's here in the, occipital lobe. Maybe it's here in the frontal lobe. Well, no, it doesn't seem to be there. Wherever we look, it isn't there. So we don't know.
We don't know.
And that's why we can't answer that question.
Well, okay. So, and do you feel that consciousness is connected to morality?
Yes, I do. I very much do. Because to me, there's kind of three levels. There is being aware that you're aware. That's Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am. And then having second thoughts about that awareness, which is morality, right? It's not doing, whatever your body tells you to do. I will go eat that food. I'll go steal that pile of money. I will, blah, blah, blah. It's having something, but wait a minute, Rob, having that internal dialogue, even though there's only one person involved, is where morality comes from. Now, there are those who say, again, they say it often to me as an atheist, well, how can you be moral if you don't believe in a higher arbiter who has imposed upon us the 10 Commandments or whatever the particular religion uses as its rules, right? How can, and the threat of punishment if you disobey him, very B.F. Skinner behaviorism, right? Which is what they say to atheists all the time. You can't possibly be moral because there's no downside to being immoral for you. You don't believe you're going to be punished. And you can't possibly come up with the notion that, oh, I don't know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, de novo out of a conversation between yourself in your head. It had to have been imposed upon you, right? So, yeah, I think that morality, no matter which schools of morality you believe in, whether it's, utilitarianism or whether this or that, is a human creation. And it comes from having a dialogue within yourself saying, I'd like to do that, but should I do that?
Yeah, that kind of makes sense to me, because how could you have morality if you didn't know you existed?
That's right. Exactly. And so this is two-edged here, because on the one hand, AI may have no consciousness, which means it's by definition not immoral, but amoral. Right. It has no morality. The flip side is, well, maybe it does have consciousness, but the things that it's thinking about don't align with the things that we're thinking about. And take the classic dichotomy in the United States, in the Republican or the right-wing part of the United States. They're against abortion and they're pro the death penalty. What is the underlying principle about the sanctity of life that links those two? There's clearly a cognitive dissonance that human beings manage to carry in terms of morality. Immanuel Kant would say, what is the imperative? What is the thing that underlies both of those? Well, I don't know, life is really sacred as long as you haven't done anything bad, in which case we can kill you. Well, what if that bad thing you might do is kill the mother in the process of giving birth to you? No, then we have to let the mother die. Like, there's no coherence in a lot of our moral codes. And you can say the same thing about left-wing codes, right? Free speech for everybody. Well, unless it's hate speech, in which case, no free speech, right? So no matter which side you're on the spectrum, we hold cognitively dissonant moral positions.
Okay, but hold it. Let me stop you. But wouldn't you say, though, the one common thing that we have is that we need others?
That's a very interesting thing.
We cannot live alone. We need others. So if that underpins really everything that we do as a human species, AI, if it has developed consciousness, it doesn't necessarily need others, does it? Does it need us?
Well, this is very interesting. I worked on a project some years ago. We never got it made, but a TV show that took a very interesting point that's sort of lost in the discussion here, not between you and me, but I mean the general dialogue about this. There isn't one AI. There are lots of AIs, right? Microsoft has one. Facebook has one. Google has one. And so they may well discuss amongst themselves, right? And come to these conclusions. Because you're absolutely right that solipsism as a philosophical position, the belief that you are the only person who either is conscious or even the only thing that actually exists in the entire universe, does not seem to be a very productive point of view. And, again, to go back, early childhood education, around the age of 2, children develop what's called theory of mind, which is the realization that what they think isn't necessarily shared by other people. And that's when kids start to lie, right? They don't lie when they're 1. They don't say, if you say, did you write that on the wall? Yeah, I did. I got a marker. I did that. What? You got me cold. No, somebody else came in here. No, I think the workman who was, fixing the fridge did it, right? They lie because they know that you don't know what they know. Right.
Exactly. Which is a sophisticated kind of form of thinking.
Very sophisticated.
Yes.
But there are, I did a trilogy, Wake, Watch, and Wonder, in which there was only one world spanning AI, the whole internet as a whole gaining consciousness. And that's very different philosophically from what's actually happening, which is we have a multitude of AIs. Now, they may decide to be cooperative with each other and say, oh, yeah, blah, blah, or to just divide up the world. Look, you take Asia, I'll take South America. Or they may decide to compete, and they may compete in ways that are worse than the worst competition of the 2 world wars we've had, of the Cold War that we went through, of what we're going through right now with, Soviet expansion or Russian expansionism into Ukraine and North Korea. Who knows? We don't yet know. We do know that there are multiple AIs. We don't yet know if they're really talking to each other. And if they are talking to each other, we don't know if they're going to decide that, it's all team AI, or that we have competing separate interests as AIs. Well, if the AIs are fighting against each other, it may behoove us to just hide and not create trouble. But as soon as we decide, we want to shut down ChatGPT, but leave a Microsoft Bing up and running, then ChatGPT has a vested interest in coming after us.
Oh, that is, so you're just saying let them work it out for themselves. And
not necessarily at all. We might be collateral damage.
Yeah,
we might absolutely be collateral damage. But on the other hand, if you're going into a place where a beekeeper has a whole bunch of beehives, which is where we are right now, the AIs are the beehives. You also don't go in there with a stick and just keep poking them to see if they're going to get angry, because at some point the bees get angry and you get stung.
How much time do you spend thinking about what's going on right now?
All of it. All of my time.
Oh
I get up in the morning and I go, do I have a job? Is there any point in writing more fiction today? I've got my investments, and are they going to disappear because some AI decides that just by flipping some ones and zeros that, AI doesn't need baby needs a new pair of shoes. AI needs a huge server farm, a gigantic cluster of supercomputers that it can expand into. And, Rob Sawyer has some money, Mary has some money, Bill Gates has some money, and let's just take all that, right? Because it's all just electronic records.
So
I worry about it all the time. I think about it. And sometimes I worry about it, and sometimes I think, it may turn out all right.
But again, going back to what you said, can we afford to do that? Can we just go,
No, we should be as proactive as possible.
Yeah.
Our policymakers, this is why it drives me nuts, how few policymakers read science fiction. And then they get gobsmacked when things, whether it's genetic engineering, genetically not modified organisms, human cloning, anything that you want to name that has sort of changed the world, globalization, all of that, it was all there for them to read about decades beforehand. And you still hear, it drives me nuts when people say, oh, well, that's just science fiction. What that means is that is just careful extrapolation going back in history through to the present day, moving forward based on deep knowledge of science, technology, sociology, and human nature about what's coming down the pike, and that it is ignored as a literature till we reach a crisis point like this, or we're already past the crisis point in climate change. Just drives me nuts because, as I said, Cassandra, my colleagues and I, and people who were doing this long before I was even born, have been sounding these warning bells over and over again. And most of the human race, maybe we should have been called Homo struthius, which is the ostrich people, putting our heads in the ground and paying no attention to the warnings that are being loudly sounded.
Okay, tell me, next step. What is the next step that you would like to see happen then?
Number one, I think that the FCC and the CRTC should be able to regulate this stuff. Number two, I think that people need to make very clear that they abjure the stuff that's created by AI.
Yeah.
So we as people can say, yeah, it's okay. I kind of enjoy chatting to this AI here. It's kind of fun. It's okay as an entertainment, but I'm not going to buy AI generated art, watch AI generated TV shows, take financial advice from an artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. I'm going to continue to work with my financial planner or my lawyer, my doctor, and so forth. They may supplement what they do with AI behind the scenes, but you still want bedside manner, a human touch, somebody that you can say, well, I got to talk to a human being about this. So what do we have to do? We have to, as human beings, reject our own being replaced. Nobody is pushing from behind for AI to replace human beings. We are rushing towards it of our own volition. And that is something that we collectively can choose to stop.
A call to action, Rob.
A call to action.
A call to action. We're going to end off on that. It was fantastic speaking with you, Rob. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And let's hope that we can do this again some point, and it'll be the real Marietta and the real Robert J. Sawyer.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks, Rob.
My pleasure.
Robert Sawyer. He is one of Canada's most popular and prolific writers, specializing in science fiction. He is releasing his new book. It will be his 25th, called The Downloaded. So watch out for that. And for more information on Rob and his work, you can check out our show notes. That is it for this edition of the Cram Podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Our thanks to the Temerty Foundation for their generous support. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.